lake where a shockingly high number of people have drowned. An ancient tomb that is guarded by the soul of an evil warlord. And objects with the power to harm anyone who touches them. All over the world, there are places and objects that are thought to be cursed. But are curses simply the product of our need to find reasons for tragedies that we can't explain? Or could they actually be real? Well, that is what we'll try and find out. The Blue Ridge Mountains, Georgia. Deep within this mountain range lies Lake Lanier. Millions of people venture to this popular vacation spot to relax and unwind, despite the fact that every year, a shocking number of people drown within its placid waters, and many of their bodies are never seen again.
If you live anywhere near Lake Lanier in North Georgia, you're going to hear every summer all the deaths. There are bad boating accidents, and once somebody goes overboard, it's almost impossible to find them before they drown.
Lake Lanier, from the surface, looks clear, but we hear it time and time again when we respond to these drownings. People that say that he didn't go in the water, come up, struggle, and drown. He went in and never came back up. And this happens time and time again. This lake seems to take people in one gulp.
Lake Lanier is 26 miles long. It has 700 miles of shorefront, and it's tempting to attribute the inordinate number of fatalities to the size of the lake. But the fact is, there are lakes of commensurate size in northern Georgia that don't have half that number of fatalities or accidents. So clearly, there is something about Lake Lanier that is cause for alarm.
Since the 1950s, it is estimated that more than 600 people have lost their lives in Lake Lanier. It is such a staggering number of fatalities that for decades, many have come to believe that these waters may be cursed.
Even though there was a lot of people around, there was just some strange vibe about the lake. I feel it's a majestic body of water, but you can't deny that there's something odd about Lake Lanier.
When you actually get into Lanier, you get a feeling that you're not alone when you should be alone. I don't feel like someone's reaching out to grab me, but the water feels thicker than it should. And what I mean by that is a lady fell out of a boat, and we actually witnessed it. And we ran over there and pulled her out of the water, and she was very upset, and she said, "I'm so embarrassed." And I said, "Don't worry, we see people do this all the time." And she said, "No, you don't understand, I'm a lifeguard." And she said just when she found herself in that water, it was just like molasses. So all the things that we see in this lake, it finally got so bad and scared the locals so much that we think maybe we're just stuck with a curse we have to live with.
Could the numerous fatalities that have taken place at Lake Lanier be the result of a curse? It may sound far-fetched to some, but for decades, researchers have been examining the possibility that Lake Lanier could be harboring the power to inflict harm. And according to their investigations, it may have something to do with the history of Lake Lanier.
Lake Lanier is the largest lake in Georgia. It's a man-made lake meant to provide water and power to the surrounding communities. They actually made it by flooding a valley that had a town in it, Oscarville. So they had to relocate the people that lived there, and then they just drowned the entire town under water.
Oscarville wasn't the only town that was affected by the building of Lake Lanier. In the 1940s and 50s, the U.S. government acquired the rights to more than 56,000 acres of land in Forsyth, Hall, and Dawson counties to make room for the 38,000-acre lake and more than 700 miles of shoreline. This included several small towns, and the remains of these communities are still submerged beneath the surface of Lake Lanier.
When they built the lake, they left tons of structure in the water. We've got concrete, roads, bridges. We've got a racetrack under there. We've got standing timber that stands as high as 40, 60, 70 feet from the bottom.
There seems to be a great deal of debris in the water, so it's not an ideal place for people to be swimming or boating or jet skiing or partying. The fact is, it's a dangerous place.
Authorities claim that many people drown in Lake Lanier because they get caught in the debris lurking beneath its surface. But researchers studying the lake believe this is only part of the story, and that the source of the dark force drawing people down into its murky depths is a Native American burial ground that was submerged by the lake's construction.
Back in 2007, there was a drought, and the water went way low. And because of that, they found an area called the Samore Mountains, Indian Mountains. It's considered a sacred area that belonged to the Native Americans. The Creeks and the Cherokees. Lake Lanier was built by the Army Corps of Engineers. And according to the Army Corps of Engineers, they removed all the bodies while they were creating Lake Lanier. But back when they were building these lakes, they didn't have ground-penetrating equipment. So there's a great likelihood that there are bodies of the Native Americans under the waters of Lake Lanier.
Could the presence of Native American remains beneath Lake Lanier have a connection to the unusual number of accidental deaths there? Has the Native American belief in the power of ancestral spirits cursed Lake Lanier?
Certainly among Native American traditions, we have a widespread belief in curses, particularly land-based curses. And this connects to an overall sort of belief in animism, that the material world is infused with spiritual aspects. Now, many Native American traditions had long-standing, very deep beliefs about how to treat dead bodies and how not to disturb them and how not to disturb burial sites. The desecration of those is held in Native communities to bring on a lot of bad spiritual energy.
Is it possible that Lake Lanier is home to dark spiritual energy? Perhaps. But what's most surprising is that even though this lake may be cursed, people continue to enter its waters every day.
There's world-class divers that will not dive Lake Lanier. We have 11 to 14 million people a year that are coming here and taking their chances, in spite of the fact that there has been somewhere between 600 and 700 drownings on this lake. I'm not saying that there's a curse, but I'm saying there's definitely some bad energy. And if it's not cursed, maybe it should be.
Can disturbing the sanctity of human remains actually unleash a deadly curse? Well, there are those who believe that when archaeologists tampered with the tomb of an ancient warlord, they triggered one that was so strong, it changed the course of human history. Samarkand, Uzbekistan. Near the center of this ancient city in Central Asia is a mausoleum known as Gur-e-Amir. It is also known as the Tomb of the King, because inside its magnificent dome lie the remains of one of the most feared rulers in history, Tamerlane the Great.
Tamerlane was often credited as being the last of the great Asiatic conquerors in the mold of Genghis Khan. He started off basically as a minor tribal leader, and then he embarked upon a 35-year career of constant war and conquest, during which he's often credited with exterminating 5% of the world's population.
Tamerlane was very adept at psychological warfare and putting his adversary on the wrong foot. His most chilling battlefield signature was the erection of large numbers of towers around the city he just conquered. And these towers were made up from the decapitated heads of the victims of the latest conquest. A really awful warning to anyone else who might think about rebelling. This is the fate that awaits you if you even think about any opposition. I will destroy you and destroy your city.
In 1405, Tamerlane died of a fever at the age of 69. By that time, his empire stretched from Siberia to the Mediterranean Sea. But some claim that even in death, Tamerlane wasn't finished exerting his power on the world, because his tomb is believed to be protected by a deadly curse.
Certain people attain that level of, absolutely terrifying, vicious person. Something is evil in them. So when they die, whatever it is that makes them evil, a lot of people think still exists. And where would it be? It would be wherever the body is. So in the tomb of Tamerlane would be this evil presence that's now still terrifying in his death.
For centuries, Tamerlane's tomb was untouched by archaeologists for fear of unleashing the dark forces inside. But 80 years ago, his tomb was finally disturbed. And there are those who believe that it set off a chain of events that changed the course of history. June 20th, 1941. Under the orders of Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin, Russian archaeologists entered Tamerlane's mausoleum and opened his tomb.
Stalin was interested in the clues behind Tamerlane's greatness. Tamerlane was such an incredibly powerful man whose career had been one of bloodshed and savagery. And Stalin wanted to send a very strong message that he was a 20th century equivalent.
When the expedition arrived on site, they were told, Tamerlane's tomb has remained undisturbed for centuries, and not to open the tomb, that if they did, something terrible would happen. Of course, the expedition proceeded to open the tomb, and this very powerful smell of frankincense, of rose oil, and camphor suddenly bursts forth and envelops the expedition. Some of the members of the expedition believed that it was the smell of a curse.
There are supposedly 2 inscriptions on the tomb of Tamerlane. The first inscription reads, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." The second inscription read, "Whoever disturbs this tomb will unleash upon the world an invader even worse than me." And that's an indication this is a sacred resting place. This is not somewhere to be trifled with. It was not something that should even be entertained.
The body was removed, and it was taken back to Leningrad, where the remains were being studied at that point in time. One of the things that was in the paper was a picture of a Soviet archaeologist holding the skull of Tamerlane. And in the article accompanying this, there is a reference that there were locals who were disturbed about this.
On June 22nd, 1941, 2 days after Tamerlane's tomb was opened, Russia was hit with a surprise attack by Germany, its supposed ally. Over 3 million Nazi troops marched into Russia in the most massive invasion in history.
Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union without any warning. Up until then, there had been a pact of non-aggression, so this came as quite a surprise to the Soviet Union. The Nazis called this surprise attack Operation Barbarossa, and they were very swift and overwhelming in their attacks, and they managed to get very far into the Soviet Union rather quickly, causing great devastation and loss of life to the Soviets.
Tamerlane's body is removed from its tomb on the 20th, and the Eastern Front erupts in flames 2 days later. Remember, there was a curse Whosoever will disturb my tomb will unleash an invader worse than I. So a lot of people would say the synchronicity between the removal of Tamerlane's body from his tomb and the launching of Operation Barbarossa isn't an accident.
As German troops continued to overpower Russian forces, Stalin's advisors began to question if the curse of Tamerlane's tomb had been unleashed. They urged him to return Tamerlane's remains to Uzbekistan in the desperate hope that it would turn the tide of battle. And to their astonishment, it worked.
Tamerlane's remains are put back in December 1942, but the whole course of the war at the Eastern Front changes. And from that point on, it's just one long nightmare retreat for the Germans back to Berlin in April 1945.
Is it possible that returning Tamerlane's remains to his tomb broke the curse that triggered Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union? For many, the evidence is hard to ignore.
I think for those who subscribe to what we call the Curse of Tamerlane, there are these two great coincidences. Coincidence one, the tomb is opened against all the objections of the Uzbeks. Hitler invades the Soviet Union. Coincidence number two, Tamerlane is reinterred with full burial rites. Hitler is defeated, so it comes full circle. Two coincidences or two proofs that Tamerlane's curse was absolutely for real. Take your pick.
The idea that the curse of Tamerlane's tomb somehow brought about the Nazi invasion of Russia is unsettling, to say the least. But curses that don't have such far-reaching implications are no less alarming. Consider the case of a hotel in Los Angeles, where for decades there were dozens of guests who checked in, but never checked out. Los Angeles, California, February 19, 2013. Numerous guests staying at the Cecil Hotel filed complaints about low water pressure. A maintenance worker is dispatched to check the water tanks located on the hotel's roof, where he makes a shocking discovery. Floating face down in one of the water tanks is the decomposing body of 21-year-old hotel guest Elisa Lam.
On the last day of 2012, New Year's Eve, was the last time she was seen alive. Elisa Lam was caught by the camera in the elevator, and then she disappears.
The LAPD, they released a video of Elisa Lam, and it's a really bizarre video. She's seen going in and out of an elevator. She seems to be interacting or playing hide and seek with someone. She's frantically, erratically pushing all the buttons in the elevator. And then she was found face down inside a sealed water tank at the roof of the hotel.
After conducting an investigation, the Los Angeles County coroner ruled that Elisa Lam's death was an accident. But the bizarre circumstances surrounding her case led some researchers to believe that something more insidious had taken place, and that Elisa Lam was actually the latest victim of a deadly curse that plagues the Cecil Hotel. Since it first opened in 1924, an alarming number of people have taken their lives while staying there, earning it the nickname Suicide Hotel.
The Cecil Hotel is a Beaux-Arts structure. It was built in the style of grand American hotels. Back in its day, it was quite beautiful with columns, marble floors, an expansive lobby, and it was intended to be a very high-class hotel for an upwardly mobile clientele.
All hotels have deaths in them, but for some reason, the Cecil Hotel seems to have far much more than the average number. When I was doing my research, I found 17 suicides within the newspaper archives that link to the hotel. And those are just reported ones. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but compared to all the other hotels, I would find maybe one or two, almost without exception. So it makes this particular hotel stand out.
The Cecil Hotel had only been open a few short years, and the sheer number of suicides was already coming to a peak. W.K. Norton, he poisoned himself in his room. And Army medic Sergeant Louis D. Borden, he surgically slit his own throat in the hotel room. The list of unexplained deaths goes on and on and on. And people were like thinking, wow, could it be something about the Cecil Hotel that triggered this kind of insane behavior?
There are certain places that seem to attract an inordinate amount of violent activity. It's very easy for us to talk in terms of coincidence when we're discussing curses. But if people hear that there was an act of violence, suicide in a certain place, that seems to spark something in the human imagination, including in the most negative sense. Hence, we have the phenomena of people being attracted to certain spots. You might use the expression, I don't like the energy coming off of that place. We use it metaphorically, although there may be something actual to it.
What is it about certain places, such as the Cecil Hotel, that causes people to harm themselves or others? Could they really be cursed? Some researchers claim that if there is a dark energy at the Cecil Hotel, it may have already existed at this site long before the hotel was built.
Another interesting aspect of curses, and cursed places particularly, is that there's always a reason of why this became cursed. So, for example, in LA, this has been a very contentious area for a long time, ever since the initial colonization. So the local tribe, the Tongva tribe, suffered greatly. They were pretty much massacred at the hands of the Spanish colonists who arrived in this area. Or later in 1871, where they had the Chinatown Massacre, where this was an ethnic-driven violence perpetrated against the Chinese community in LA that had been established here. And it was horrific. The idea is that there was a curse on this area that reflects these atrocities, and that the curse is not going to be lifted as long as those atrocities are not accounted for.
Is it possible that the dark history of the Cecil Hotel was caused by a violent energy permeating the area? True or not, the Cecil Hotel nevertheless closed its doors in 2017 as a result of its sinister reputation.
A lot of people, of course, roll their eyes at the idea of a curse. But if you gave a person the option of spending a night alone in a place that was rumored to be cursed, like the Cecil, most of the people who roll their eyes would probably pause, given such a macabre history.
Is it possible for a place to be imbued with dark energy? In the case of the Cecil Hotel, it certainly seems possible. But there are also many who believe that objects can carry curses too. For instance, there's a sports car that has a reputation for killing its drivers, including one of the most iconic movie stars of all time. Shalom, California, September 30th, 1955. At 5:45 in the afternoon, a brand new 1955 Porsche 550 Spider, traveling west on US 466, collides with an oncoming sedan. The impact instantly kills the driver of the Porsche. News of the ill-fated accident sends shockwaves around the world because the driver was none other than the iconic American actor, James Dean.
At the time of his death, James Dean was definitely the one to watch. He had his debut movie star performance in East of Eden, and he had 2 other movies in the can, and he was launched into becoming the face of rebellious Hollywood. But all that came to a crashing end on September 30th, 1955.
James Dean's death behind the wheel shocked friends and fans alike. Not only because the actor was such a rising star at the time, but also because even at his relatively young age, 24-year-old Dean had already proven himself to be an accomplished race car driver.
When James Dean came to Southern California in 1954, he entered the Palm Spring road races as a novice driver. He won his race as a novice and qualified for the Sunday main event against veteran drivers. He was a very serious and aggressive competitor with a lot of skill as a novice driver.
James Dean's reputation as a competent driver was so well known that many found it difficult to believe his death could have been the result of poor driving. Over the years, some people have claimed that there is only one possible explanation for the crash. They believe that James Dean's car was cursed. And as evidence of the curse, they point to a fateful encounter that Dean had with a fellow actor shortly before his untimely death.
2 days after James Dean purchased his Porsche Spider, he was having dinner with Alec Guinness. During the course of the dinner, James Dean told Alec Guinness he had just purchased a new Porsche Spider. It was outside in the parking lot, and he wanted to show him the new car.
Alec Guinness, upon setting eyes on that vehicle, he had a very strange reaction.
Some strange thing came over me, some almost different voice. And I said, if you get into that car by 10 o'clock at night, next Thursday, you'll be dead.
5 days after Alec gave that warning to James Dean died in a head-on collision with the only other vehicle on the road. Sir Alec Guinness recounted that as soon as he laid eyes on the car, he felt a sense of evil emanating out of the vehicle itself.
Is it possible that James Dean's car was possessed by evil? Well, if that's true, the curse was apparently strong enough to survive even after his tragic death. Because in the years following James Dean's accident, several strange incidents involving his car took place.
The exterior of the car was pretty much obliterated, but the chassis and the engine block remained intact. Another race car enthusiast by the name of Dr. William Shatner took the engine block from James Dean's car and put it into his own car. And then he parceled out some of the parts to a good friend of his and colleague, Dr. Troy McHenry. So Church and McHenry are now driving their Porsches with James Dean parts in the same race. Guess what happens next? McHenry loses control of his Porsche and drives head-on into a tree and dies at the scene. And Estrich, he flips his car and winds up severely injured in the same race.
George Barris was a legendary car customizer in California. He got hold of the carcass of James Dean's Porsche Spider and put it on display and loaned it to the Los Angeles Safety Council with the theme that speed kills, drive safely. He told stories about how individuals touched this car and injured themselves.
The stories that are from my father are really interesting. When the car was dropped off at the Beers Custom Shop in North Hollywood and first came to the shop, his mechanic came out to help him, unload the car. It rolls and breaks his legs, rolls over his legs and breaks his legs. Incidents keep happening. And at that time, these stories that he's telling us, it's concerning. And you could tell he's realizing, hey, there's a curse tied to this car. This is serious now.
Is it possible that the curse on James Dean's car lived on, even after it had been wrecked and salvaged for parts? It's an unsettling notion, so disturbing, in fact, that some people believe George Barris took matters into his own hands.
In 1960, George Barris sent the car to a safety exhibit in Miami, Florida. He said that when the transporter came back to LA, the car was missing. In all my research, we cannot find any trace of the missing car. In looking at all the speculation revolving around the curse, I believe that George Barris disposed of the car and it disappeared forever. The question of the curse and the death of James Dean has been going on for 65 years. And looking at those strange incidents, they may have been coincidences, or there may have been an actual curse. Unfortunately, we'll never know.
Was it merely a coincidence that several people who came into contact with James Dean's car were harmed and 2 even died? Or is it possible that this vehicle was actually a cursed object? Perhaps the answer can be found by examining a collection of artifacts believed to contain such dangerous energies that they are kept under lock and key. Cincinnati, Ohio. Just outside the city, on a normal suburban street in an ordinary neighborhood, is the home of Greg and Dana Newkirk. From the outside, their home is not much different from any other house on the block.
Get some fork action going on.
Yeah. But inside, it contains something quite extraordinary. Because there is a room in the basement that is filled with a collection of strange objects sent by people from all over the world that are believed to be cursed.
Greg and I lead normal lives, and we go about our life the same way that everyone else does. We just happen to be caretakers for very strange objects.
The way that we got started collecting cursed objects was complete accident. It wasn't something that we had set out to do. Never would have imagined myself doing this. We were just interested in general weirdness. My wife and I investigate all manner of high strangeness, and we were both very interested in the idea of cursed objects. We slowly gained a reputation as being particularly good people for this. And so anytime anyone had a problem with an artifact, they would come to us and say, I don't know what to do with this. This thing is affecting my life. Will you just take it off my hands? It'd be easier to just give it to you and let you deal with it. So we built up this collection of very bizarre things.
Visitors to the Newkirk's home are given ample warning that the basement is filled with objects that are cursed.
We have a lot of haunted robes.
But curiously, every day, the Newkirks receive requests from people who are eager to view their cursed collection.
You'd think with cursed objects you want to avoid them, but there is a draw to them. When an object is said to be cursed, another word you could use is special. It's special. If this chair is cursed, it's different from every other chair in the world. And that makes it unique, that makes it interesting, and that draws our attention every single time. And the fact that that specialness is that it hurts people, that appeals to a certain macabre streak that we all have as human beings.
People think of cursed objects as being kind of fun and spooky, but working with them, it feels a lot less about that and a lot more about that kind of heavy responsibility to keep some of these objects with us under lock and key and maybe out of the wrong hands. and maybe in a place that's safer not only for everyone else, but for them.
The Newkirk's collection includes several objects that are considered to have the power to inflict harm on anyone who comes near them.
This is the cursed deer skull. We drove down to Nashville to pick up from a woman who saw this in an antique store and took it back to her office, and almost immediately her employees started getting sick. One of her employees was hit by a car, and then the wall that this was hanging on actually fell down and took half of the building with it.
There are certain objects specifically in our museum that, without people knowing why they feel the way that they feel, they will definitely have heart palpitations, anxiety. We've had people almost faint. We've had people throw up. We've had people dry heave. People have very visceral physical reactions to being around some of the objects.
Among the cursed objects in the Newkirk's collection is a deadly ring that is claimed to kill anyone who wears it. A Bible used during a failed exorcism, and a doll that is believed to spread illness wherever it goes. But of all the cursed objects the Newkirks have come across, there is one that is so harrowing, they refuse to keep it in their collection. It is an unsettling wooden effigy known as the crone.
The crone really is the definition of kind of a cursed object. It is a carved statue of a woman. Someone at some point in time took this object and attached the noose and the nails. It was given to us by some hikers who found it in the Catskills, off the beaten path in a cave. They took it home and initially started to experience really frightening things. Their animals were behaving strangely. They were finding wet footprints on the ground, and they didn't know what to do. Someone who we had worked with previously put them in contact with us, and after having some communication with them, they sent the crone to us.
People who would get near the crone, they would be just overwhelmed with anxiety. This guy came all the way from Canada to come and see the crone. He begged us to take it out of the box. Almost immediately, his eyes roll up in the back of his head and he starts to bleed from his mouth. And he has a violent seizure and he has to be taken out by the paramedics. And that's when Dana and I looked at each other and we said, we have to do something about this.
The Catskill Mountains, October 2018. After a string of frightening incidents, Greg and Dana Newkirk are convinced that a strange object in their possession, known as the crone, is cursed. So they've traveled to this remote region of upstate New York to free themselves of the evil object.
The crone is one of the objects that does fall into that very small category of objects that we didn't feel like we could handle. It got to a point where the crone was just too dangerous for even us to take care of. And what we wanted to do was bring her back to the Catskills, which is where she's from.
To remove the crone's curse, the Newkirk's plan was to return to the area where it was originally found by two hikers many years before, at which point they would remove the nails embedded in the crone in a cleansing ritual.
We wanted to bring her back, and every time a nail was pulled out, the intention was that we were pulling that curse out of the object. We hiked into the woods for miles, and I set up a circle. The idea of setting up a circle was basically just to create an energetic space for containing this ritual. And the whole time we were doing this, we were hearing footsteps and strange sounds that weren't animals around our circle, but we couldn't see anything.
We were absolutely terrified, but we start performing the ritual. I pull the nails out. Soon as that happens, we feel this almost electric pop in the air.
When we were done, every coyote on the mountain just started howling. And the ritual was finished, and what we were looking at was just a block of wood. And we just kind of knew that we had done what we went there to do.
Scholars of religion have long known the power of ritual, that when a group of people get together and engage in the same set of actions, believing that there's a supernatural origin behind them, that brings people together. And so, special movements that you need to go through, special sayings or songs that you need to do. It's an incredibly powerful phenomenon that can help rid us of the devil or whatever other force has cursed us.
Is it possible that ritually cleansing the crone removed its curse? Perhaps. But of course, it all depends on whether you believe curses are real in the first place.
Whether you believe in cursed objects or don't believe in cursed objects, they can still have a power over you. What that power is, to what extent that is, how it kind of comes out, who knows? But they're still powerful objects, no matter how you look at it.
For people who don't believe in curses, what I would say is keep believing they're not real. That's the best defense you have against a curse, is to not feed it.
So what's your take on this? Are curses real? Or is it simply human nature to look for a supernatural explanation when bad things happen? Well, until we know for sure, it might be wise to avoid those so-called cursed places and objects. Let them remain unexplained.